for organizations that have folks who are running VS Code and Claude Code and GitHub Copilot, this tiny LLM thing is like a precursor to something much, much bigger that's probably going to happen with, your LLM or your Claude Code is like install skill. And then the skill has like a whole bunch of dependencies. There's some malware running in this third-party repository that's a dependency of this other thing that you installed, and you have no idea, and you just install it, and now you have like InfoStealer malware on your work developer machine, steals all your keys, and now, like some big giant company gets hacked or whatever because of it. I really think like we're going to have like a big supply chain like thing happen related to that world, because this world where people are running in YOLO mode and like installing every skill they can and not even thinking twice about it.
Hey, so I got a question for you. What do you see that most organizations are missing when it comes to their security and penetration tests?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Because to some extent, I think it depends on the maturity of the organization. But generally across the board. So for context, I have done like 1,000 hours of internal pen testing in 2025. I've pen tested like 150 organizations over the last few years. And it's kind of funny because one of the things that I think is most common is one of the things that I actually messed up when I was an IT admin, and that is local admin password reuse. So when I was an IT admin, you would just use the same local admin password for all the machines. That way, you go down to Susie's computer and like you have to, run something as an admin or uninstall something or install something. You're just like typing the password and you're good to go. And it works on Joe's machine and Tom's and everybody else's. And while you're doing help desk, you just make your run, right? And you just help all the users that need help. So it's quick and easy. But little did I know, right, that, you give an attacker local admin on all of your machines, and that's a recipe for disaster, right? So now it's like, it's a very common finding that we see on internal pen tests is this local admin password reuse thing. Not the only thing, but if I had to pick one thing, it's getting better, but that would be the one thing.
Mike, you're a resident pen tester here.
Yeah, I mean, I go after that all the time. As soon as I crack one or get a hash, I spray. Where does it work? I mean, password reuse is probably one of the biggest things in the local admin piece. You'll see it everywhere. So yeah, I mean, it's easy. What's funny is I'm sure you've been doing this a long time too. It's like a lot of the same tricks still work pretty much all the time. The only thing I was running into recently, and I'm actually curious, this was one of the things I was going to ask you. There's a bigger shift, especially with smaller organizations, to switch to hybrid environments where that doesn't necessarily work that well anymore. And you have this whole goofy like Active Directory situation where it's not traditionally on site. Now it's in the cloud, Azure based. Yeah, I mean, have you run into that a lot? And what's your go-to if that's the case where you don't have a lot of the traditional stuff?
Yeah, so we have been running into that a lot lately where clients have hybrid environments and the devices themselves are Entra joined, right? Where it's like they're not AD joined. In most of those cases, fortunately or unfortunately, they still have some remote access into their environment. So it's either a VPN or it's something like a Zscaler, like a zero trust network access product, something like that. In some cases, the clients are Entra joined only and like they have no connection to their on-prem environment. And then, unfortunately, we find out during the internal pen test that it's not actually an internal pen test. It's like this cloud assume breach thing. And we're like, oh, shoot, it might have been helpful for them to tell us during the discovery process. Normally, we're pretty good about discovering that in scoping calls and pre-sales, but there are a few times where we figure that out during the engagement. We have to adjust. In those cases, like I said, we pivot to kind of assume cloud breach, kind of an internal pen test of the cloud and SSO resources. So think of all the things that an organization would SSO. Microsoft 365 services, obviously. Then you have like maybe a document management system if you're a law firm, or a financial services system, HR systems. Like all of these are typically SSO'd. And one of the things that I like to do as an attacker is I'll go to like the Microsoft portal, right? And you can look at all of the applications that the user has. And I'll do like an inspect on the page, and I'll just like get a count of all like the hrefs on the page, or identify the links. And this one pen test I did, it was like 170 SSO apps that I had access to because I clicked every single one. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have access to literally every application. And of course, like the user that I had was completely over permissioned. Like I didn't need all 170 whatever applications, but just their provisioning process is like just give everybody access to everything, and then there's no issues. So the cases though, when they're hybrid, we still attack AD, we still attack the on-prem resources and file shares and stuff like that. But to your point, Mike, we are seeing more and more organizations go hybrid and get rid of file shares in favor of SharePoint and ShareFile and things like that. I think from my perspective as like an attacker, I think the attack surface changes quite a bit, right? When you move off-prem. I don't think it eliminates it by any means, but it's definitely an interesting adaptation, if you will.
Yeah, we had one recently where we do assume breach a lot of the time, especially for smaller clients. You just find a lot more. It's a lot more helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up having, it was just Office 365 stuff only, the account they gave us. And it's like, oh, it doesn't actually have access to any systems. Like, well, now we got to find a way onto a system.
Yep.
And I was like, all right, now I guess it's time I got to play with some of this Azure Entra attacks I haven't really had to do a lot of. Usually I find another way in. And I was like, well, this will be fun.
And in many cases I find too, you might find this too, is like the IT guys still have domain joined systems. Mm-hmm. There's still some Active Directory presence. There's still stuff running there on-prem, primarily like IT workloads and like IT admin systems and stuff like that, just because it's easier for them. Mm-hmm. To connect to those resources if they're domain joined as opposed to Entra joined. So we're actually doing an engagement this week where I'm working with one of our internal pen testers on our team, and they started out Entra joined. They did some recon and discovery because they were on the internal network like a regular user, and they figured out that there was group policies that allowed domain users to be members of local admins. Admins on several endpoints. So they had like a provisioning OU, and there were users that had local admin rights. So they're trying to pivot over to a domain joined system to get access to this local admin path to kind of further pivot. So there's interesting use cases like that where there's still some workloads there that we can kind of pivot to.
Yeah, I didn't have any of those fun pivots. I was struggling getting that initial access. I was trying to do, like, I had read some attacks where if they don't lock down like the applications and stuff in the Entra tenant, you could add one and you may be able to get it to like basically elevate your privileges in Entra via the application itself. Yep. I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I wish I could have gotten it to work.
Yeah, with like service principals.
Yeah. Harsh times. But yeah, so I know this is a lot of tech speak and not a lot of super techie people like deep dive on here. So this is just what we'll probably do with some of this is we'll try to break down some of the concepts, make it a little bit more approachable for folks as well. So don't be surprised if I'm like, hey, let's define that. What do you mean by that? We've gotten away from that. We used to do that all the time, but yeah. What else is on your list, AJ? What else? What other fun question you got? I bet you have another one in the bag there.
Yeah, I just want to touch on like the difference between on-prem and O365 and kind of how that changes the dynamics, right? Because if we're a small to medium-sized business, maybe we've already migrated, maybe we haven't. What are the benefits to migrating to a SaaS platform like O365? And how does that change the landscape, which you guys kind of talked about recently? But what does that mean for like a security perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. The growing trend. So I posted something on LinkedIn the other day about like how many workloads are still running in Active Directory versus hybrid and stuff like that. And there's still quite a bit of folks who are going to take a while to get completely off of AD. But in my opinion, the risks just change. Like the attack surface just changes, right? And it's no secret that identities are like the number one most attacked thing. like there's like billions and trillions of compromised passwords in Have I Been Pwned. There's an info stealer malware that just was the Light LM. There was like an info stealer component of that, and there was like 300 gigs or something, wasn't it, or terabytes or something? I don't know what it was. I didn't read all of it. But anyways, there was an info stealer component to that, and info stealer malware is super hot right now. And what I see the risk being for folks is credentials, passwords, but also like conditional access hygiene. So if you're a Microsoft shop, if you don't have conditional access policies kind of locked down, you might be opening up yourself to more risk than you necessarily need to. So for example, if you only do business in United States, if all of your users are in United States, even in different states, like you're a remote, organization, you probably don't need to be logging in from Argentina or Ukraine or whatever else, right? Belgium. So you could geo-filter that using conditional access policies. And what's great is you can use named locations and trusted locations and stuff like that to really lock down those logins, enhancing MFA, stuff like that. So the risk that I see for folks moving there is partly it's not necessarily increasing attack surface, but changes the attack surface to one where the IT admins who are now administering it don't have the skill set required to maintain it and secure it, right? Because think about, if you're a 20-year IT veteran and then all of a sudden you're shifting to Microsoft 365, maybe you don't have the skill set and the experience of working with that. So you don't necessarily know what dials to turn or what security settings to enable. So you hire an MSP and maybe they do it, but maybe they aren't as experienced as maybe you'd like. So there's a lot of technical debt with like the skill gap there of securing Microsoft 365 and leaving gaps open like that, especially if you start talking about having like actual workloads in Azure. If you have servers and you have networking and you have all those components, that definitely changes things. And it's not Active Directory by any means. Like the skill set required to manage it and secure it is completely different. And most organizations that I see kind of shifting don't necessarily have that expertise yet to kind of keep that safe. So that's a big thing that I'm noticing.
It's a good point. It's like that with a lot of places though too. Like even the shift into the cloud infrastructure for web applications, moving away from these monolithic, like you just have one big server and then maybe a database. And now it's like, no, you can have a lot, they auto scale all this stuff. You have a lot of defenders that have never seen that before, don't have a lot of experience. And then they get into the situation where now we have to investigate this application. They don't really know what the heck is going on or where to find the pieces to investigate. Yeah, that's a big point. It's a big shift. Cloud is different.
Yeah. The other thing too is, it's kind of funny. I was doing I did an internal pen test for a university client, and then afterwards, we're like, hey, can we do some consulting to help with some additional stuff, offensive related? And we got into it, and turns out like their backups were on the IT guys, or in the IT guy's basement, and they had some issues, so we needed to figure out a DR plan, right? Like that was a real thing that came out of this discovery call with them. Was like, hold up, before we do security stuff, right, we need to make sure we have backups, that they're tested, that we have a DR plan, because all of the security stuff doesn't matter if you can't recover your data, if you can't keep the business or the university running, then all that other stuff doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter if you have EDR, right? If your DR plan doesn't work, you don't have one, it doesn't matter. So the move to the cloud, right, now your data, the shared responsibility model, if you remember that from back in the early cloud days of like whose responsibility is it to patch and back up the data, it's like a lot of IT admins are just trusting the cloud providers to back up the data, secure the data, be able to recover the data in a DR scenario, and DR plans are not reflecting that in reality. So that's another risk that I see is like all the SaaS stuff, an intern flips a switch the wrong way and everything's down. Now what do you do? Right? What's your plan?
Yeah. AJ is really big about making sure vendors are doing or understanding that. Like you were hot on that for a while. Like make sure you check with your vendor to figure out where the line's at.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Because this has come up in the past too, right? Like a lot of people assume that their covering their portion of the risk and just assume that the service provider or third party vendor that they're interacting with will do their part. And I think that's probably one of the riskiest ways to conduct business,
Mhm.
because a lot of times like the vendor's not going to take that on because they don't want to get sued. And if you don't read your contracts or understand what's going on, then that assumption can be enough to bankrupt your entire business.
Yeah, I had the privilege and luxury of having an old boss that was a stickler about contracts. And I learned a lot just from listening to him, because his office was like kind of like a kitty corner to mine, and I could hear him talking like on these negotiating calls of like, no, we need this, like this isn't good enough, we need to do like all this other stuff. And I learned a lot from both like direct conversations with him about negotiating contracts and stuff. And that's actually a really big deal, to make sure that you have provisions and clauses in there for things like pen testing, or making sure a pen test has been done, and having that due diligence is really like an underappreciated thing when it comes to SaaS and cloud and all software, right, that you're procuring. It's a really big deal. And it's funny because I've been on the receiving end of it too, of, everybody's probably, Mike, you probably relate, and you guys can relate to this. We did another pen test, and they had a very strict vendor management policy. There was like this due diligence and like a lot of process and red tape to go through, multiple red lines, and like quite an arduous process, right? But to some extent, it needs to be that way to protect yourself and to protect the organization and make sure all those ducks are in a row.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that companies have, especially on the SMB side, is they feel like a lot of that is out of their hands. Like, I'm a small business. I don't have a right to ask these type of questions or to inquire. And so they don't do it. But, people are going to work with you for the most part. Some won't. Sure.
Mhm.
See ya. There's plenty of other vendors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is like, if you're giving someone money, then they should honor your requests to some extent, right? Like they don't have to say okay to your red lines and your changes, but you absolutely have the right to make the requests and make the red lines and make demands, really, of like, no, like if we're going to give you money, this is how we want it to be done. And if not, then we'll find another vendor, because chances are, there's another vendor that will kind of work with you in that same space or that same product field kind of thing.
Yeah. On the enterprise side too, I've seen companies where like if you don't meet their security requirement, you're not a vendor for them. And that's a hard line drawn in the sand. And when you're talking at that scale, right, like they have money behind their products, they have, pen tests for different LOBs or lines of businesses, and they're, running a SIM and having all these things put in place. So I think that's going to continue to evolve. And like you mentioned, Mike, if you are a smaller, maybe medium-sized business, you can still ask these things, and I encourage you to ask. At the very least, they say no, but at least you gain more understanding of how your vendors are operating, and then in turn can answer more questions that might arise from your board or whoever you're reporting to.
Yeah, I'd strongly encourage SMBs and like business leaders to lean on your legal counsel, and presumably, everybody has some kind of legal counsel. If they don't have the expertise in the cyber domain, perhaps like look for somebody who could be a trusted partner for you to look over those contracts with you. Doesn't necessarily have to be like anything crazy or extensive, but just having somebody you can call to like, hey, can you look at this contract and like see, am I crazy here? Should I like change stuff? What are some of the provisions I should like kind of consider in here, changing or redlining to help protect us, and make sure that we're covered, and make sure that the vendor is going to do what they say they're going to do. I think that is definitely a great idea.
Yeah, and then the big thing to add on top of that is AJ's big about this one too: trust but verify. So he's in the detection space. You have all these vendors saying, "Hey, we do this. Hey, we do that." And when we used to Purple Team together, that's what we did. Hey, do you really? Let's give it a go. Let's see if you can catch this stuff. And at least not to us. Not surprisingly, it's not true most of the time, right? They say they do. They say they do all these MITRE techniques. They catch maybe the most simple versions of them, but when you start making just slight adjustments, doesn't catch it. Goes right through.
Universal tenet of information security: trust but verify.
Yeah. Who said that originally? Where did that quote come from? Does anyone remember? It was like
Hotspot verify?
Patton or something, wasn't it?
Sure, sounds good.
I don't know. Someone famous, more cool than
Somebody did.
us.
You heard it here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
ChatGPT.
Spencer, can you kind of walk us through like your day to day? Is it strictly Microsoft related, Azure? Are you doing GCP in Google's platforms or AWS? You already mentioned you have some on-prem as well. Like, what does your day to day look like?
So for me specifically, on weeks that I have engagements, it's purely internal pen testing. That's 95% of the work that I do is internal pen testing, primarily on-prem Windows AD, but mostly like it's hybrid environments. So almost every organization that I've pen tested in the last 4 years has been some kind of hybrid with Entra, usually. We see some GCP, some AWS, some like Okta as like the primary IDP stuff, things like that. But what I do specifically is probably 95% internal Windows Active Directory, and then a small percentage is Entra. So I currently don't do like any cloud, like pen testing or anything like that. We do that at our firm, but what I focus on day to day is like internal Windows Active Directory, Microsoft Stack. That's like my bread and butter. That's what I like to do. That's what I plan to do forever, probably to some extent. I will always have my hand in some sort of internal Windows Active Directory type thing. But yeah, so that's kind of my core competency.
What's
Okay.
your favorite tool? I want to throw a question in there. What's your go to maybe 2 or 3 tools? How about that? I know there's more than one. There's got to
Yeah,
be.
I get this question all the time, and it's funny because I'll do like a conference talk or something, and I'll ask people like, how many people have heard of whatever, and how many people have heard of whatever, and it's funny to see how many hands get raised. So I was at Zero Trust World, and I asked this question like, how many people have heard of Locksmith? And like, a handful of people raised their hand. And then I said, how many people have heard of NetTools? And like double the amount of hands were raised for NetTools as opposed to Locksmith. So I'll explain those. Locksmith is an Active Directory certificate services auditing tool. It's the best ADCS auditing tool there is. It gives you remediation snippets. It finds all of the ADCS issues there are. And it's like a known good tool. It's not like an attack tool. So Locksmith, super, super great. I think a lot of people listening might know that one already. NetTools, though, is a sleeper. So NetTools is like a Swiss Army knife. And it says it on its website, so I didn't make up that name. But what's cool is it has like 150 different like tools, like subtools. Everything from like LDAP searches, so you can like search AD using LDAP queries. You can compare group membership. You can run like whois commands. You can look at permissions. So NetTools is like the sleeper tool. It's super, super awesome. And it's a great sysadmin tool. And like if you're in the IT world, it's super great for that. But conveniently enough, like it's a known good tool, like it's legitimate. So it works very well for like an assumed breach thing where we have access to a machine on a Windows environment. Works super great. The third one I'll mention is ADeleg/ADelegator. I think they go together. That is an Active Directory delegation management tool. Think of essentially like Bloodhound, but in the format of AD users and computers, if you're familiar with like that layout, right? So it can find misconfigured permissions and delegation issues in Active Directory. So those are like my 3 favorites right now.
Cool. Actually, I hadn't used any of those. I'm pretty bad on like tooling. But
It's
all
crazy
good.
because like every time you go on LinkedIn or X, it's like new tool here, like
Yeah.
new tool for this, new tool for that, especially with cloud and SaaS stuff and bug bounty, web. Like I feel like every time I open X or LinkedIn, it's like new tool for this, new tool for that.
Yeah.
Especially with like the coding assistants now, right? Like everyone can have their own or
Yeah.
straight up make their own. I just want to clarify real quick. For those of you who might be unfamiliar, like typically AD Active Directory holds all of your users, groups, computers, and like all of your accounts, right, across your network. So if you hear, like, I'm sure we'll get to this, if you hear DA, like a domain admin, or like basically if someone owns your domain administrator, they own your domain. They can do whatever they want. They can delete your other domain administrators, lock you out, anything they want to, right? So that's kind of the key to the kingdom, if you will.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of owning Active Directory for European bases before we migrated to a single Air Force network. And I took down a base because I was told, I work nights, I was told to restart the DCs to update them. So I took one down and I'm pinging it and it's responding to ping. So I take the other one down and in like 2 minutes we get a phone call and they're like, what the heck did you do? And they're like, oh, it's this guy. And they asked me what happened. And I was like, well, I rebooted it because you told me to. And I learned a very important lesson that day. And my trainer learned a very important lesson that day. And the lesson was just because it responds to ping does not mean the services are running. And it was a fighter jet base. So that was kind of an oopsie. But yeah, he also should have taught me better. So we both learned something, and it was a productive experience.
Yeah, I have a similar experience related to vulnerability management. So this is something I talk a lot about vulnerability management. It's a world I came from. I used to run vulnerability management, so a lot of experience with this from the defender side and from the attacker side. So I was very new at this back in my old job. And when I first started doing security, we were running Nessus and we were patching stuff, right? And everybody knows like who's done this. You run a Nessus scan and then you see all the stuff, and there was like a couple criticals, and I'm like, oh, I should probably knock those out pretty quickly. So I started digging into it, and it was this MSXML 4.0. If anybody, that rings any bells for anybody. At the time, it was wildly out of date and insecure, and I wanted to remove it. So it was on this application server. So me being like the ambitious like IT security guy, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna prove that I'm doing a good job and being proactive. I'm going to go and uninstall this vulnerable software. So I uninstall it from this application server, and I don't know, like 5 minutes after, I get a knock on my cubicle from the database administrator. He's like, hey, did you touch anything on this app server? And I'm like, oh, I just uninstalled this vulnerable software. It was a critical on our Nessus report. And he's like, yeah, because we can't take payments now. Like the business is down. It's like, well, shoot. And mind you, I didn't ask anybody for permission. I didn't ask what it was for. Like I just went and uninstalled it, right? So a lot of lessons there. Firstly being like, don't be a lone wolf with this stuff because you could break production and take systems down. But also getting other people involved in the vulnerability management process gives them a little bit of ownership in it. And they feel like they're part of it, as opposed to like the security person saying, hey, you got to remove this, you got to patch it. Getting people involved in the conversation and helping or having them help with the solution brings them in, and they feel less like it's you demanding it and more like they're part of it. So they're more likely to kind of play ball with you. And that was a big lesson that I learned. Fortunately, you just reinstalled the software and everything was fine. But I had to lick my wounds for a while after that.
I think that's a lesson that a lot of people learn when they get into cybersecurity, where like you just read all these things, you're like, oh, you're super motivated. Security is super important. You know, our job is like the most important thing. People are going to fight us, but we got to stay strong. And it's like, no, like calm down. This is the team sport. Things you just can't patch and fix all the things. I started out in a hospital, same thing, right? We all know how vulnerable hospitals are. They have all this accreditation stuff they have to do with those little devices. Cybersecurity is different in healthcare. But yeah, like everyone learns that. And then even like me as a manager now, it's like you really got to get that buy-in from everyone if you want to move, if you want to push these projects. You can't just steamroll your way through. It is totally a team sport.
Yeah, and that's something, that I think a lot of IT directors, CISOs, CIOs can relate with. The more you're able to kind of bring people into the conversation and build relationships with them, particularly, the more you're able to push your objectives and the things that you want to do forward, right? The easier that's going to be. Us security people, right? IT directors, CIOs, CISOs, right? We feel many times, like you said, we're kind of very self-important and we think like security is the most important thing. But for 99% of companies, security is not the thing that makes the company money, right? It's a bank, it's a credit union, it's a healthcare organization. It's, the business side of things is really, really important. That's the thing that is the driver. It's the business and it's the money. So if you can relate the security stuff in the context of financial resources or impact to the business, that's going to make people kind of understand the risk and understand the importance of some of those security initiatives more than just saying like, hey, we're going to get hacked because, this software is out of date. They're like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does that mean to me and the business? Like, how does that relate? Because the business is the most important thing. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that as security practitioners because we want to do a good job, right? Like, we're passionate about this. We want to make sure the company is secure and safe. And we kind of lose sight of that sometimes of like, oh, there's other initiatives that are more important than this out-of-date software.
Yeah, that's another area I think junior folks miss as well. The business matters. Like you wouldn't have a job if the core
Right.
business doesn't work. So yes, it's important. Security is important, but the business is what really matters. So just deal with that. Sorry, AJ. I just wanted to throw that up there.
No, you're good. I think this is a really good segue into reports and context. So, Spencer, if you don't mind, how do you ensure that after you've conducted a pen test, and we'll go back into like the actual pen testing piece, but after you've conducted a pen test, how do you make sure that the business understands the impact of those findings and like how it relates to, like you said, right, making money or staying in business versus like, oh, this is a critical, but it's not directly connected to the internet. It's through like this other segmented network. Like it's not really an issue.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. And that's something that we often hear from clients is like, well, this is an internal pen test. So somebody would have to get access first, right? Or like, yes. It says it in the executive summary, like this is an assumed breach, like we assume a user's compromised. So let's take it from that context first. So that's the first thing I start with, like, understanding like, yes, you do need initial access, you need a way to get into the environment, but taking that, like starting at that, how do we prioritize vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in the environment is related to the business. So for example, if a law firm, many law firms have like a discovery process where they're collecting evidence, right? And that evidence is like zipped up and password protected. Well, those passwords are just in their document management system and they're there for all the users who need access to those case files. Now, you could argue that those passwords shouldn't be in the document management system and they provide access to client data and stuff like that. And that's true. But at most law firms, it's just wide open access, right? The risk of that is, I would argue, a little bit less than if, say, a domain administrator credential is sitting on a file share, right? If the all-powerful account in your environment is just in plain text on a text file or in a text file on a share because an IT admin kind of forgot to clean it up, that's way bigger of a risk than those, evidence files that have passwords in your document management system. So when we do a debrief call with a client, we try to relay that prioritization of those risks, right? Like we found this issue, it's a critical because of X, Y, and Z. Now that could be because it's easy to exploit. So like certificate abuse is a great example. Many of those certificate abuses are very easy. Like you can automate them, right? Just a couple clicks and you can own the environment in the worst cases. That's going to be something that we present to them and say, this is a serious risk because the ease of exploitation is very high. Whereas, like relaying attacks and other stuff that's like multiple steps, that's going to take a little bit more effort. That's not something that, a regular ransomware group is maybe going to be able to exploit, or it's not going to be the first thing that they go after. Like this cross-domain resource-based constrained delegation crazy attack thing. So that's how we kind of go about it, is understanding the business that they're in, the context of that finding, and the exploitability and kind of the ease of exploitation in the environment.
I will say that this has been a trend in the industry, and I like that it's going that direction where context matters much more. So like, I mean, I think you've seen it as well, AJ, with like how they're scoring vulnerabilities and stuff now, where like if it's external or if it's internal, if there's a proof of concept publicly available, all those things are taken into account now when assigning a score, and it just makes logical sense. I don't know why we haven't got there before, but it's a thing now.
Yeah, and another good example is like the spooler service on a domain controller. So for those listening, the spooler service is what controls like printers. So if your domain controllers particularly are also print servers, then the print spooler service is running. And the reason that's dangerous is because the print spooler service, among many other things, is coercible. So you can trick that domain controller to authenticate to you as an attacker on the internal environment. And that spooler service being enabled by itself is a finding, but it's not a critical finding by itself, right? Now, there are other contributing factors that would increase the risk of that, right? And there's some technical stuff that we don't necessarily have to get into, but if there are other things that an attacker can abuse along with that, meaning if I can chain that, then the risk of that goes up. So to your point, Mike, the context of the environment matters very much so, and prioritizing the risks and particularly the remediations, including like the impact of the remediation. So if I need to change, if my password policy is 7 characters and I want to go to 12 or 15, that's a huge culture shift. Right? That's going to take some time and planning and coordination. It's not something I would recommend just turning on overnight unless you want to hate your life. Whereas like, SMB signing on a DC, it should be enabled by default anyways. And if you turn it on, it's probably not going to break that much. It's probably going to be okay. So taking the context of that and the impact of remediations when you're talking about the findings and severities and prioritization is an important aspect of this.
Speaking of SMB, don't use it.
SMB signing is like one of those ones that, like, by itself, it's not that bad. But when you start looking at relaying capabilities in the environment, if they have like an admin service account or something like that flying around, then you can relay it to something else. Like the whole chaining thing. And then, that's a fun thing. And most bug bounties nowadays are a bunch of chains as well, a bunch of lows, mediums, or whatever, just thrown together.
Yeah, it's like you find I'm not a web guy, so my web experience is limited, but like what I've been hearing from the bug bounty community is like there's somebody put a tweet out and he's like, I found an SSRF on something, and it was on one of the bug bounty podcasts. There was a guy talking about this. He's like, I found this SSRF or something, and then he looked across like all of his campaigns that he had done previously, and he found like the same bug across them all, and he found like a way to connect the dots, and it was like the super cool explanation that I'm not explaining very well. But those kinds of things are important to kind of take into the context of the conversation when you're talking about risk and prioritization.
Yeah, I think I'd be able to do that. Now you get to explain what a server-side request forgery is.
I can't even tell you. I'm not a web guy. So, cross-site scripting is kind of my go-to.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was doing another university, right? And they had this app, this Joomla website, and it allowed like access to a lab environment. And that Joomla like product thing was a third-party product. So I couldn't really like test it, like full-blown test it kind of thing, because it wasn't theirs. They didn't own it. We didn't get permission ahead of time. But I did test it lightly for some cross-site scripting, and I found some instances of cross-site scripting on this. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's worse than this. I'm not a web guy, but I'm pretty sure this could be chained with something else, and it could be a lot worse. But cross-site scripting is usually my go-to. If I see something internally, like that's my go-to to look for. And then if there's cross-site scripting, I just assume it's going to be worse. And I'm like, yeah, you need a web pen test, or you need to ask the vendor to do more due diligence on this application. But yeah, I don't claim to be a web guy, so I'm a bad one to ask.
Cross-site scripting, speaking of, that's the one where I learned that business context matters. Because like what they teach you to do is like, oh, just print something to the screen with cross-site scripting. And I got it beat into my head so hard when I was a consultant at Optiv. They're like, No, you got to do something cool with it so that they pay
Yep.
attention. Otherwise, they're like, I don't care if something prints to my screen.
Yep.
Who cares? And so like that business context,
Yep.
you gotta show the attack chain and the impact
Yep.
it can have on the business. Yeah,
Yeah,
cross-site scripting.
our web team's super good at that. Like they'll develop POCs to like steal admin cookies if it's stored, right? Stored cross-site scripting, to show the impact, right? Because to your point, like just popping up a thing that says alert one, like in all the CTF training, right?
Yep.
Not super, not super insightful. Of like, okay, what's the impact, right? Like you don't really know, especially if you're not familiar with the attack. But if you work up a POC that has like some sort of like crazy iframe, like embedded iframe to steal like the admin's cookie or something, that would be kind of neat, right? So showing proof of concept is super important. You can't necessarily do it for everything, especially like WordPress. And you have all those plugins and like 900 of them are vulnerable to cross-site scripting in different ways. I guess now with AI, like we're getting there to that point where you could POC all of them. But picking the ones that are most impactful and actually showing like, okay, this is how an attacker might abuse this in reality, is really helpful.
What you got, AJ?
What are some attacks that still work, like regardless of on-prem or in the cloud?
Well, so for on-prem ADCS, ever since SpectreOps released that research, I think it was like 2021 or something, certified pre-owned, that research. Ever since then, that has been probably present. ADCS issues in general have been present on like 90% of reports, internal pen test reports. So that's probably the most prevalent. And like I said, some of the most dangerous of that, the number one most dangerous is referred to as ESC1, escalation one. It's essentially where you can impersonate any user in the environment as any other user. And that just means you can impersonate the domain admin account, for example. And it's like immediate priv ask. It's super easy to exploit. There's not a lot of visibility into that. So that still works time and time again. And it's probably one of the most prevalent. But even simple stuff like credentials on file shares and in SharePoint, it all comes down, a lot of it comes down to lack of hygiene, right? Think of, if anybody's familiar with Ping Castle or Purple Knight, like those AD health assessment tools, the output of those tools, many of them are exploitable and directly abusable. Those are the kind of things that still work very much today. And a lot of it is permission based, it's certificate based, and like hygiene type things, like credentials on file shares and silly stuff like that.
I have a question for you since you mentioned certificates. Is there a way to abuse that if you don't have a internal certificate server? Can you still abuse that?
So, yes, if there's no PKI, there's something called Pass the Cert. There's a project. I think the tool name is Pass the Cert, if I remember right. But essentially, you can authenticate to Kerberos with a certificate. So even if there's no CA, if you have a valid certificate, you could potentially still authenticate to the domain.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I did a pen test when the SpectreOps research first came out. It was like 2021 or 2022. I did an engagement for a law firm. I found some ADCS stuff off this new research. I'm like, oh, cool. It's like an ESC1 and I abused it. And they had some other findings, but they weren't like directly exploitable or abusable. I did a pen test the next year, and it was, I think, like 2022 or something like that. And I think it was, I can't remember if I'm getting the name right, like Almond Security or something like that came out with some research about how you can authenticate to Kerberos with certificates and this Pass the Cert thing. And I did that on the same client's engagement the next year, and it worked. I'm like, I found this last year, but I didn't think it was abusable, but it actually was. So this has been sitting there for like a year, abusable, and I didn't find it until this research came out, right? So those are some instances where like early on, this stuff was still developing, and people are still finding more abuses to it. Like you can coerce and then relay, right, with certificates. So a lot of interesting attacks that way too.
Yeah, I asked because I was looking to do a certificate attack my last pen test, and I just couldn't find a way to make it work. I haven't needed to. I was like, oh, let me try something different, and just trying to force it in there because I haven't got to use it in a real environment yet. So I was like, well, I don't think I
Yep.
can make it work.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's from Almond OffSec. It's called Pass the Cert. So you can authenticate to LDAP and LDAP-S with a certificate through S channel.
Okay.
So that's like the path there. If there's no PKI.
Yeah, I'll look into that more after this. You were going to ask something, AJ. Sorry, we nerded out for a second.
Man, admittedly, I didn't know that users had certificates. I only knew of tickets. So that whole thing is interesting. But yeah, I pulled up the link to the Spectre Ops research.
Now he's going to make a detection
That's cool.
about it.
I don't think you can.
Not enough people are looking at LDAP for detections. So I would, if we could rant on that for a minute,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, go for it.
a lot of times, and Mike, you probably relate to this, like you do a pen test and you maybe are able to pivot to a machine that doesn't have EDR, like an unmanaged device or just doesn't have EDR, or you can access it through a VPN, or you have maybe in a red team scenario, you have some sort of implant, right? And you can proxy your tooling in. In all of those cases, EDR is almost meaningless, right? It's getting better, but a lot of those signals to detect it is on the network. It's LDAP, it's SMB, it's all those other things that the EDR doesn't have telemetry for. It's on the endpoint, right? It's looking at processes and memory and stuff like that. And if you are doing recon, if you're like looking at certificates or running LDAP queries, all that stuff will kind of breeze by the EDR. And that's something I wish folks would do more, is like focus on network and LDAP and all these alternate communication channels for detection. Because it's known, like if you look at a CrowdStrike report or other reports, they show attackers they're going after unmanaged devices. They're going after devices that don't have EDR, firewalls, edge devices, appliances. They're starting from there and pivoting to those because they know once they get to it, like detection is minimal from that point.
Yeah, I had a client that I've had for a few years, and I decided to pursue that route because I try to just focus on different things every year with them, just to give different perspectives. And I kept finding the same thing, had default credentials, and I would put it there every time. I was like, okay, let me show the impact from this. So I used it to stage all of my attacks that year. Just I was launching everything, would
Yep.
upload all my tools because it was a conference system or something like that, and yeah, just Linux, whatever, boom, just launch everything. Like, yeah, we didn't see any of that, and like, there you go. That's why you should change the password.
Yeah, even some of the identity products, like they've come a long way. But so for example, CrowdStrike Identity, at least at the time of testing, this was maybe last year, I want to say, I did an internal pen test and I got an admin account through Kerber roasting and cracking the hash. And it was a local admin on a server. And I used PS remoting to access that machine. CrowdStrike Identity had no logs for that.
Interesting.
Zero logs for PS remoting. And I got in a call with them and like they were like, no, we don't have logs for this. So there's still quite a bit of a detection gap when it comes to even identity-based detections right now. I think Microsoft for identity is actually quite good. I think it's probably out of all the EDRs that have identity stuff, I think MDE's identity product is probably the best right now, in my opinion, after testing it on internals. But it's still a growing field. It's something I think should have more investment in it. And who knows, maybe with the help of AI, we can crunch more data and kind of figure out what's going on with identities. I don't know if you guys remember. You guys remember user entity behavior analytics? Remember the whole like UEBA craze, like maybe 5 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago? I wonder, like I know that kind of transitioned into identity because CrowdStrike, their identity product used to be a product I can't remember the name of, but they bought it, right? They bought it and they bolted it on. It wasn't like a native creation for them. And I think that's what has happened to a lot of these identity products is they bought stuff, bolted it on, but never really invested in it because they've been attracted by other things. But UEBA, like this user entity behavior analytics thing, and like identities, it's super important to focus on. And I think it's untapped potential from a threat detection standpoint.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting area, and I know SIMs are starting to build that capability in. Like, I think Splunk and Elastic all have that type of functionality in there. and it is good, but it has to be chained with some other stuff. Like now they have a lot of risk-based alerting, risk-based type of detection stuff going on, and it definitely plays hand in hand with that world now. But like the classic AD attacks, like the Kerber roasting, stuff like that, like just ticketing attacks are so difficult. I don't know if you've ever looked at detections for those, but they're such a pain to get to a good fidelity. It's such a pain.
Yeah. And that's partly Microsoft's fault, because if you've ever looked,
Yes, blame Microsoft.
Yeah.
yeah, listen, I love Microsoft. I'm an MVP. Like, I grew up on Microsoft. Like, I owe a lot of my career to Microsoft. But like, let's call it out when we see it, right? The auditing and the logging, and just the certificate database itself doesn't have a lot of data to go on, right? There's very few logs for ADCS, and the only way to get to that is to have something running on the CA server and like create some of the telemetry yourself, which to your point is very difficult, right? Like the native logging is not super helpful, especially in a larger environment that has a ton of noise and you actually have certificate requests going on all the time, right? It's not like, a lot of SMB clients, like they might not even use their certificate server and it's like they're decommissioning it, so it would stand out. But in large environments who are actually using their PKI, like no way. Like there's so much volume of data that's going through there.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I think that's the issue, is the lack of telemetry, or the like noise is just so much that it's virtually impossible to key on something out of that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been anywhere where they're like, hey, let's make some detections based on certificates or any of this. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, or to look into it anywhere I've worked, which is interesting.
I've seen it come up a couple times on internal pen tests where the clients have alerted on like the Kerberos ticket request using a certificate. And I think that's what MDI, Microsoft Defender for Identity, is looking for. It's the Kerberos request via a certificate, which Kerberos logging is a little bit better, So being able to see that is maybe a little bit better. It's a little bit behind the 8-ball, if you will, because like you already have the certificate and now I'm authenticating to Kerberos. Like it's almost too late at that point. It's something. But the Kerberos side of things is maybe a better detection avenue at this point, because there's just a little bit more logging and telemetry there. But it is a difficult thing. And I empathize. Like I'm not a SOC analyst or a threat hunter, detection engineer by any means. I know some of them and I know how difficult it is. Particularly like you were talking about at the beginning of this episode, is like you change one thing and now it's completely hidden, right? Like you just tweak it a little bit and you find that, this rule actually doesn't fire on it because of whatever, right? I feel like a lot of detections can be brittle and broken, and I empathize because I think it's a very difficult discipline in security to do.
That's where purple teaming comes in handy, folks. No, that was like, honestly, that was probably my favorite part of when I used to do purple teaming, was that playing, trying to figure out, how great this detection was, or trying to come up with something new anyways that's going to detect more varieties, trying to predict like what may they change in the future, what are the trends going to be with this type of attack. That was the cool stuff. That was super fun getting to play both sides of that one.
Yeah, if you're like in IT, a lot of folks probably listening might have an MSP. Ask your MSP if they have detection engineering on staff. Ask them if they have folks who are like tuning the logs, tuning the alerts and the detections and stuff like that, because it is very valuable and useful to have somebody that can do that and take the logs from a pen test or a purple team and help you work on that. There are a lot of leaps and bounds you can make in your threat detection program just by taking like your pen test data and throwing it over to the MSP and be like, hey, we want to be able to detect some more of this stuff. Like, let's work on this. Is definitely worth it.
Yeah, and make sure your MSP doesn't break your entire network if they see something wrong.
Isolate first and ask questions later. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. They knew there was a pen test and just decided to break the entire network.
Ouch. That's brutal.
Yeah, it's good times. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I think with detection engineering too, I think one of the issues is with the massive amounts of data, like now most people have data lakes, right? We're going to need ML on top of the logs to have better detections and better chaining of things because, like Mike said, and we did this in our purple team days, you come up against an EDR, you get blocked, you just rename it. Oh, it works now. Cool. Or it was really simple to fuzz like what the EDR was detecting on. So a simple like function rename would get it passed, right? And so as we have the speed of AI and these LLMs now, even right now on my side, right, we're finding that we need an engine on top of the logs that's not just looking for this plus this equals one, right? Like we need to start building some behavioral chains and really focus on where the choke points are. So we might not have good telemetry over here, but at step 3, we see it 100% of the times. So we need to make sure that, like, the lateral movement piece, for example, we have that nailed down really well. And I think that's a challenge. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I see it. Like I see the amount of data only increasing, right? As we connect more and more SaaS applications, as more stuff is getting fed into the SIM, as we onboard more users, and especially now with agents in the mix, right? Like, good luck trying to detect what an agent is doing, right? Like, we couldn't detect human activity, very well up until this point. Now we have thousands of agents running, like at any given time, or more, right? And they have identities, and they have, tool calls and MCP servers, and all of this stuff reaching out to the internet. Like, there's quite a lot going on here, and it would presume that like you need a different strategy for that, right? And like I said, I don't claim to be a SOC guy or anything, but what I see from the attacker side of things is the defenders and SOC analysts and those folks, detection engineers, are overwhelmed with data, such that like I can just send thousands of requests, overload like the buffer, right? And that's been something that attackers have done before with like Microsoft 365. They have, in some cases, kept like a history file, right, of the changes of the document. So they would encrypt the document and overwrite it so many times so that the archive, like the old version of the file, is no longer there. We've seen that with internal detections too, where Microsoft Defender for Identity, CrowdStrike, they all have like a buffer window, right? Of like how often they collect logs up to like the mothership, and there's like a buffer. If you can overload that buffer, maybe the next thing that you do after that doesn't get detected. So I think it's particularly difficult now with agents in the mix where there's going to be even more data. So yeah, I think some kind of normalization or something like that is going to be important to even get anything useful out of it. So then you can start detecting abnormal behavior and malicious stuff.
But the thing with the agents and stuff, I do testing at my employer, right? And I tested Cloud Code, and then we have another provider. The other provider is very happy about not collecting logs, and I just see that biting a lot of companies in the rear if something goes wrong. Um, so I'm curious, like, have you seen this or know of any other companies that have processes like that where they're like strictly we will not collect logs because there could be sensitive information, and that's on you to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, from like a platform perspective, I think like there are some that say they have no retention on like prompt data and stuff like that. I think it's safe to assume that the data that you have is very much a product of their ecosystem, meaning they want to train on it, right? Like the AI platforms want their product and their platform to be the best. And the only way to do that is to get the freshest and the best data. So of course they're going to be siphoning that stuff off and like pulling that data in, regardless of their terms of service and all that stuff. I think there's a certain amount that is probably pulling that data in. I do know, like, I haven't tested a lot on the agent, like MCP side of things. Anybody who's listening who wants like some really hot takes related to agent security and AI and MCPs, look at Zach Corman. on X. He's doing a lot of interesting stuff related to like OpenClaw, and he made a video about NemoClaw and doing a lot in AI security, and is taking a very pragmatic approach to it. And it's very refreshing. It's very much just like calling things out as he sees them. So I haven't tested a lot of like the agentic workflows and stuff myself, but what I see like doing my own stuff is like, if I'm a defender trying to protect developers, for example, right, using like GitHub Copilot and VS Code and stuff like that, that to me is like a nightmare scenario, because you have skills, you have MCP servers, you have these AI agents that are running, and to your point, like the logging, the telemetry, it's still not very mature yet. Like this is in the very early days, so I think it is very difficult. I don't think we're quite prepared to kind of tackle this problem. I think there's quite a bit that needs to be done, but yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are having to figure out, how do we detect when bad stuff happens with AI or even self-hosted models. Needs to have more discussions out there. Folks need to talk more about it. There are definitely a lot of opportunities. Like, we've seen poison models. Sure, there's ways to detect that endpoint side. But what if they're attacking the model and it's a service in AWS or wherever? How do you detect that? Well, you got to look at the different service components. But
Yep.
most importantly, our defenders don't know what to look for because they haven't had a lot of training and a lot of interaction with this
Yep.
type of stuff. I mean, folks definitely need to get out there. Luckily there's a lot of training coming out for this stuff. I've seen a lot more. I haven't seen any training on the defender side for this, how to defend anything,
Yep.
AI, LLM, whatever. So it'd be pretty interesting. So here's my hot take question, because you said you wanted a hot take question on this and you had something for us. Is AI going to take your job as a pen tester?
Oh man, I hope it does, so I can relax and retire. Like, I don't know, go live on the beach or something. So this is funny because I think everybody kind of relates to this, where this question of like, is AI going to take my job? No, like flat out no. Like the skill set of a pen tester is still very much in the context. It's in the like awareness of the environment and the understanding of how things are put together, and like the thinking process, like the hacker methodology or mentality kind of thing, is very much still real. And this is evident when you like ask Claude to count to like 100, right? Like put it on voice mode, ask it to count to 100. You'll see like just how dumb some of these systems are. Like they can't even count to 100. So how could we expect them to run 100 sequential commands like in a row successfully? There's a lot of guidance that's still needed, and hand holding and guardrails and things like that. So no, not anytime soon. I am optimistic though that it'll happen. I'm very much like a sci-fi guy. I love sci-fi books and movies and stuff. So like, sure, like it'll happen eventually, but not in the near term. What will happen though is like it will raise the bar, kind of like what vulnerability scanning did for pen testing. Like, the bar will be raised. We'll have to all collectively get better. And there'll be like a floor to like what the minimum is for a pen test. And it'll be this autonomous or agentic thing. And everybody's going to have agentic pen testing. But it'll still be human led and human guided and human in the loop kind of thing.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people freak out about, oh, AI, like, is it even worth getting into cybersecurity with all these models, all these agents and stuff? And it's like, yeah. I was like, obviously you're new, but if you've ever done a pen test at a bank, they're not going to let those things just run rampant in a bank. I promise you. So someone's going to have to hold the leash.
Yeah. Ask any CIO, IT director, like how many people are running agentic workflows in their production environment right now. Like not developers. I'm not talking like Claude or like Copilot. Like I'm talking like an agentic workflow. Like no one is. Like no one is doing that right now. Only the crazy people are. But the good news for people coming in the industry and defenders is like, okay, you have prompt injection, right? Or you abuse some AI thing. Like you still need to perform actions. Like You still need to deploy your info stealer or your ransomware or like do your hands-on keyboard stuff. You still need the post-exploitation actions for that to actually mean anything from like an attack perspective. So we still have very many opportunities to detect these threats, even after like the AI thing has been blown up.
I think one thing that a lot of people are forgetting is these agents and these workflows become the new systems, right? You can still, as a pen tester, attack these systems, and that will be a new requirement in order to like have it in a production environment. And we like, I've done a lot of automation on my team and stuff, and then I looked at it, and we had some training, and one of the biggest things was like, well, how much of this actually needs to be in Claude? And I was like, well, we kind of just shoved everything into Claude because it's new. And then I had it eval itself, and it was like, yeah, 80% of this is deterministic, meaning I don't need a model attached to it. So now I get to rework all my stuff and just move it back to Python.
Yep.
And then only use Claude for the portion that I need a model's inference on. And that's something that I think will be a challenge for a lot of people, because also, like you said, agentic workflows. People think LLM is like the bee's knees right now, but I don't think there's a real understanding of like AI versus LLM versus agentic.
Yep.
And that'll be a big step.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I think people there's huge upside to this. Like the blood is in the water. Like people know like there's huge financial windfalls for people that create like some agentic thing and then like they sell it, right? And then they have like a big exit, right? There's so much of gold rush going on right now that people are like completely glossing over the fact that you don't necessarily need to solve every problem with AI, right? To your point, like look at the problem you're trying to solve, and if AI helps in that way, or if AI can help supplement or make the process better or the product better or whatever it is, that outcome that you're trying to achieve, if AI can help with that, then great. But if not, like we don't need to bolt AI on just because. Like RSA is happening the week that we're recording this, right? And the theme of RSA is agentic and AI powered or AI driven. It's like maybe it doesn't need to be, right? Like look at the problem that you're trying to solve and then solve for the problem. Don't start with like the solution and say, okay, we need to use AI for this. You know, it's a backwards way of looking at it. But it's the product of the gold rush, right? It's like Bitcoin, it's like NFTs, it's like real estate, it's like all these things that people see an opportunity on. So they're going to, you know, create an AI pen testing tool. But like 24 months ago, they were talking about NFTs, you know? It's like, come on.
Like the Salt Bay meme, just sprinkle a little AI in there. It'll be all right. Yeah. It'll sell.
Right?
Yeah.
What do you think is like the most underrated risk area?
That's a good question. I think the supply chain side of things for people who have developers or are using like Claude Code or GitHub Copilot, everyone is running in YOLO mode. They're just installing whatever skill they want. They're installing an MCP server. So great example of this. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were trying to do something with like SSH, and they just went out to like an MCP repository and like they installed the first SSH MCP server they found, and they installed it. And it was malware. It was like some Chinese characters when they were like working with the prompts, and like it was malware. They had to rotate their keys, and like it was malware, right? And it's funny because that's happening to virtually everybody. That's possible for everyone who's just running in YOLO mode, just running whatever skill is out there, using whatever MCP server is out there. So for organizations that have folks who are running VS Code and Claude Code and GitHub Copilot, this tiny LLM thing is like a precursor to something much, much bigger that's probably going to happen with, you know, your LLM or your Claude Code is like install skill. And then the skill has like a whole bunch of dependencies, right? Like Python libraries and all this other stuff. And it just like installs it for you. Little did you know, like there's some malware running in this third-party repository that's a dependency of this other thing that you installed. And you have no idea. and you just install it, and now you have like InfoStealer malware on your work developer machine, steals all your keys, and now, like some big giant company gets hacked or whatever because of it. I really think like we're going to have like a big supply chain like thing happen related to that world because of this world where people are running in YOLO mode and like installing every skill they can and not even thinking twice about it.
So the fix there is to just create a skill that checks all the other skills. Fixed.
And that brings up the debate, like, can you solve AI? Can you solve the risks of AI with AI, right? Like, does it take AI to solve the AI risk, or can you, fix AI with AI kind of debate? That's an interesting dilemma. But yeah, to your point, like these skill checkers and like stuff like that, it's very much like just like a vicious cycle.
Yeah. I see a lot of companies getting compromised by MCPs because my assumption is, and this seems pretty true so far in the industry, even if you are, somewhat mature in your security, you're going to scan the MCP server, you're going to see that it's clean, so you allow it. But if I own the MCP configuration, I can just modify that route that you're sending to, and now you're exfilling data instead of just sending it where you thought you were sending it, because a lot of people aren't going to scan it again.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to be a huge issue in conjunction with info stealers, as you mentioned in the beginning. And even last week or whatever, we had a big company in the US that was likely compromised through an info stealer infection a couple of years ago. And like that whole thing, because I'm sure at some point there's going to be like some way to relay credentials through an MCP as well.
Yep.
Like fake NTLM relays, but now it's moved to MCP. I can see that happening.
Yeah, for sure. Zach Corman on X has talked a lot about this, and he's dug in. He's kind of went after a lot of these vendors that have skills because they're doing stuff in an insecure way. And I think the latest one was like Vercel, I think it was, allows you to embed like system commands. Like you could do like geb commands and stuff like that right within the skill. You just run like system commands right with like from the, program them right into the skills and things like that. You can hide things in comments. There's like hooking with some of these like Claude Code and stuff. So you can like hook when a prompt is given and it runs those commands without like the Claude Code kind of like knowing about it. So there's a lot there. Like there's a huge attack surface there that's unexplored that will 100% be abused in some huge attack in the future.
So are you going to make an Active Directory MCP server?
So somebody's already made one.
Really?
Yeah. I asked that on X, like, I don't know, it was a week or two ago, and or I was talking about it, and somebody linked it. It's like, yeah, I made an MCP server for Active Directory, of course. I forget the name of it, but it's on GitHub. If you search for it, you'll probably find it. So there is one. I actually have had this idea for a while. I'm like, it would be great if Active Directory had a API layer, kind of like Graph API, right? Where you could interact with it similar like with Graph, and you could restrict things maybe a little bit easier with like this API plane kind of thing. So MCP on top of Active Directory, you could maybe get there and design some sort of like Graph API type thing for Active Directory. So there might be something potentially there. Who knows?
So the one that I found is called Kopla, Koppla.
Yeah.
I love that in the breakdown, you give it an Active Directory server, the user, and the password.
Yeah.
Like just hard-coded into the config, not even pulling it from an environment variable or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like having like a LDAP, like a read-only LDAP account. Like for firewalls, many times they need like an LDAP account to sync and stuff. Well, many times that account is just like, we'll just put it in an admin group in case it needs anything, right? Yeah. It's like, why do we need an account just to read properties of Active Directory? Why should that even be a thing? Like, we shouldn't even need an account to begin with. So that's what got me thinking, like, maybe there's some sort of like API layer that we could build on top of Active Directory. But then that goes into stuff like like Silver 4, and there's like identity products that are kind of doing that in a way and in effect. That kind of like API-ify, if I can use that word, Active Directory. Silver 4 is really cool because like you can put authentication or like multi-factor on top of different protocols. So like Kerberos, SMB, you can actually MFA that and put authentication policies around per protocol, which is really, really neat.
That is neat. I wonder how it like actually works under a hood. That is pretty interesting because now people can actually do like, this place would only be secure if we had MFA everywhere.
Yeah.
Now they can.
Because one of the big gaps is like, you get a server admin account or you get an IT admin account and you try to like RDP to the server. Well, maybe they have Duo on the server, right? And it's MFA'd. Well, you just fire up PS remoting and you're let right in, or SMB, or what are the other protocols, right? Well, with products like Silver 4 and do this identity stuff, I like to call it identity firewalling, but you can now put authentication on PS remoting or WinRM, SMB. So you have policies, you can have restrictions there, multiple or multi-factor, things like that. So it's a really cool technology. I think it's kind of difficult as like kind of a maturity thing. But I think stuff like that's pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah. AJ, we are at time, buddy. So
yeah, I want to end on this. So Spencer,
he was getting so into it. I'm like, all right, he might have to go.
I was checking. So Spencer, would you say most organizations are actually secure, or are they just compliant?
I think security is a myth. So I've heard a number of people say this. And I think I agree in that security is like this word that the industry has created to sell products, right? Like there's no such thing as secure, right? There's degrees of secure, right? One day you could be secure and like 3 minutes later, Susie gives her password and, the threat actor can log into Microsoft 365 because she doesn't have an MFA, right? Is the organization secure? Like, who knows? Right? So I think security in general as like this concept is a myth. I think it's degrees of security and more so I think it's degrees of resilience, if we will. It's like how resilient are we to password attacks? How resilient are we to 0 days on our edge devices? Going back to what we said earlier, like DR plans and stuff like that, like how resilient are we? I much more prefer that because it doesn't, there's no end state to resilience. Like you're constantly having to train and to improve and to manage and maintain and all that stuff. So secure, I think, is a myth, and it's like very much like a marketing thing used to like sell products. So I would say most organizations have some degree of resilience. Some are better, some are worse. But I think it's more of a resilience game than it is like a security thing.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Spencer, where can people find you? And we'll be sure to put all your links down in the description.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm most active on X most times. So I'm at TechSpence on X. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm going to try, like I post stuff on YouTube and like TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. And I try to be everywhere to some extent. But X, I'm most feisty on X, let's say.
Spicy Spence on X.
That might take you to a different account. Be careful there, guys.
Yeah, it's just I get in trouble when I talk about or when I say things like like 99% of vulnerabilities don't matter, and I have some contentious tweets out there of stuff that's rifled some feathers, but I think it's good to always kind of push back against the norms and think about like, what are we trying to solve? Like, what is the purpose of this? Are we doing it just because we're doing it? Those kinds of things. So yeah, follow me on X.
Yeah. And in the words of Bill Clinton, any publicity is good publicity. All right, Mike. So with that, Spencer, thanks so much for coming on and talking AD pen testing and sharing some wisdom from Mike so he does better in his next pen test.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. Mike and I go back a few years, and I was picking his brain when we first met about like malware development and stuff like that. So I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a super good chat.
Yeah, likewise. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So with that, we will have all the links down below in the description, and you can catch Spencer on LinkedIn and X. And we will get out of Mike's hair before he vomits on his computer screen.
All right, everyone, take care.